It was just a gas stop, a quiet night, a single mother, her 10-year-old son, and a car full of exhaustion. But when two officers stepped out of their cruiser, what followed wasn't law, it was humiliation, danger, and silence. Until one trembling boy pressed record and sent a message that would shake the entire justice system. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. Under the low glow of flickering gas station lights, the night felt almost too quiet. Naomi Carter had driven this road 100 times before Highway 204, cutting through the sleepy outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. But tonight, something in the air pressed down differently. The kind of stillness that felt like a held breath. She pulled her silver Camry into pump number 4 windshield, smeared with soft drizzle and exhaustion. The clock on the dashboard blinked at 9:17 p.m. After a 12-hour shift on her feet in the pediatric ICU, Naomi's body ached in places that didn't have names anymore. Her scrubs smelled faintly of antiseptic and apple juice, her badge, N. Carter RN clipped just above her heart. She exhaled long and slow fingers, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before reaching back to tap lightly on the glass. "You good, Eli?" she asked. In the back seat, Elijah looked up from his tablet hood, pulled halfway over his head. He was 11, thin as a reed, sharp-eyed, and always alert in the quiet way kids are when they've grown up watching their mothers carry too much. "Yeah, Mom, I'm doing spelling." He held up the screen for proof. Naomi smiled faintly, the kind of smile mothers wear when they're tired but still trying. 2 minutes. I'm grabbing water." The moment she stepped out of the car, she felt it. The awareness of being watched. Not the kind you shake off, but the kind that tightens your spine. Her eyes flicked toward the far side of the lot, where a black and white cruiser sat idling near the air pump. 2 officers inside, both white, one bald, the other buzz-cut, their silhouettes stiff, with too much posture and too little reason. She looked away, focused on the pump, slid her card, pressed the grade, but their doors opened anyway. They moved toward her with the casual pace of men who believe time belonged to them. Not a word spoken at first, just steps, heavy, measured, like a drumbeat you didn't ask for. Evening, the taller one, finally said voice, just light enough to sound rehearsed. "You driving this car, ma'am?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the badge on his chest, Officer Greg Mathers, and nodded, keeping her hands visible. "Yes, sir. I bought it 2 months ago. Registration's in the glove box. Everything's current." The other officer, Officer Darren Tate, circled the vehicle like a vulture eyeing fresh kill. He peered into the back window. "Got anyone else in there?" "My son," she said carefully. "He's doing homework." Mathers took a step closer, 2 close eyes scanning her uniform like it didn't belong to her. "You a nurse?" "Yes," she replied, lifting her badge without being asked. "Memorial Health." Tate snorted from the rear of the car. "This ride doesn't look like nurse pay. Custom rims, clean paint, late model." He tilted his head, smirking. "You sure it's yours?" Naomi didn't blink. She'd been here before. Not this gas station, not these men, but this place. The space between suspicion and accusation, the moment where courtesy curdled into something darker. Inside the car, Elijah had stopped reading. He was watching. His mother's shoulders had stiffened. He knew the signs. Without a word, he slid his phone from his backpack, typed quickly. Mom in trouble. Gas station, HUI 204. Please come. He didn't send it to just anyone. He sent it to his uncle, to Julian Brooks, the mayor of Savannah. Then Elijah did something else, something no one taught him. He opened the voice memo app and pressed record, slid the phone into his hoodie. His fingers trembled a little, but he pressed it flat against his chest. Still. Listening. Outside, the rain thickened just slightly. The pump beeped. Naomi reached for her ID. I'd like to know why I'm being questioned, she said, calm but firm. Mathers didn't take the documents, just stared at her slow and smiling. No reason, really. You just looked interesting. Tate laughed under his breath. Relax. We're just doing our jobs. Naomi didn't respond. She bent to pick up her receipt, and that's when she saw it. A taped sign on the gas station door, in faded ink security cameras, out-of-order maintenance scheduled. Her pulse stuttered. She looked up and saw Mathers' hand resting on his belt. The air between them shifted, thickened. Elijah's breath inside the car quickened. Naomi's voice, when it came, was steady but lower. My son is watching. I'd like to finish fueling and go home. But they weren't moving. They weren't going to let her go. Not quietly. And not yet. The drizzle turned into a cold mist as Naomi Carter stood beneath the humming gas station lights, her fingers tightening around the pump handle. She could feel her heart starting to race, not from panic, but from preparation. From instinct. From years of learning how quickly things could go wrong when the wrong kind of authority decided you didn't belong. Officer Mathers had taken a full step into her personal space, now his breath heavy with stale coffee and something sour. He didn't ask another question. He just stared. Naomi's badge still hung visibly from her scrubs, her hands open, and in front of her, her license and registration held out in silent offering. But he didn't move to take them. Behind her, Officer Tate had moved to the rear passenger window, tapping the glass with his knuckles. What's your name, son? Inside the car? Elijah stayed still. The phone was still recording, tucked close to his chest, but his other hand gripped his inhaler now. He was trying not to panic. The air felt different, the sounds outside sharper. His mom's posture was rigid. Elijah, he said quietly, his voice muffled by the closed window. Tate leaned closer. Are you sure about that? Looks older than he says. Don't you think Greg Mathers chuckled? Yeah. Kids grow up fast around here. Naomi shifted slightly, placing herself between Mathers and the driver's door. He's 11. He's my son. We're on our way home. If there's an actual reason for this stop, I'd like to hear it. Mathers finally took the license and registration, glancing at them with performative interest. Driving a little too nice for this part of town, aren't you? He asked. This car paid for it is. In full, Naomi said. Now please, if there's no citation, I'd like to finish pumping gas. He handed the documents back, with a flick of his wrist, letting them fall against her chest. She caught them mid-drop. Her expression didn't change, but her breathing deepened. You don't need to be disrespectful, she said. I'm not, Mathers, replied, stepping in close again. But I will say, this don't get smart. It never ends well. Tate had moved around to the driver's side, now peering into the front seat. "You got anything in here we should know about? Anything in the glove box?" "Under the seats." Naomi turned slightly, not enough to leave her position in front of Elijah's door. "No, and I do not consent to a search." "Oh, now she's quoting the law," Tate said with a laugh. "Guess you watched one too many courtroom dramas." At that, Naomi reached slowly for her phone. "I'm calling my brother," she said. "He needs to know what's happening." Mather's smile disappeared. "You don't need to do that." "I think I do," she said. Before her thumb could press the screen, his hand darted out and smacked the phone from her grasp. It clattered to the concrete and slid beneath the car. "Don't make any sudden moves," he said, his voice darker now. "You don't know what that looks like to us." Elijah flinched. The phone in his sweatshirt still recorded. The fear in his chest now mixed with something else, helplessness. The edges of his vision dimmed slightly. His breathing had shifted shallower, faster. He opened his mouth to call out, but it caught in his throat. Naomi stepped back instinctively, but Tate grabbed her arm roughly. "Stop resisting," he barked, twisting her wrist hard. "I'm not resisting," she cried out, pain flaring in her shoulder. "Let go, my son. He's having an asthma attack." Inside the car, Elijah was now slumped against the seat, both hands shaking as he fumbled for the inhaler. He tried pressing it once. The medicine didn't come. He tried again. Nothing. His fingers couldn't find the right angle. "I can't breathe," he gasped, voice thin and cracking. Mathers yanked the back door open and leaned in. "What's going on with him?" Naomi struggled against Tate's grip. "He needs his inhaler. Let me go. I have to help him." "Looks fake to me," Mathers muttered, reaching inside. With one swift motion, he slapped the inhaler from Elijah's grip. It hit the floor and rolled beneath the seat. "No!" Naomi screamed. She tore herself from Tate's hold, stumbling as she dove toward the car, reaching across her son's lap, scrabbling on the floorboard until her fingers found the plastic cylinder. She pressed it to Elijah's lips, held his hands around it, and said softly, "Now. Press. Now." He did. Once. Twice. A breath finally filled his lungs. Behind them, Tate shouted, "That's it, you're under arrest." "For what?" Naomi shouted, rising from the car, her eyes blazing. "For assaulting an officer resisting obstruction. Take your pick." Mathers stepped back, lips curled. "Should have stayed home, nurse lady. You people always act like you're above the rules." Just then, a blinding light swept across the lot. Headlights. Bright, low, deliberate. A black SUV pulled up, hard tires grinding against the wet asphalt. Doors opened. Two men in dark suits stepped out. But it was the third figure that drew every eye. Julian Brooks, the mayor. Tall, broad, calm. His coat collar flipped against the rain, his polished shoes silent against the pavement. He walked straight to Naomi, not glancing at the officers, not raising his voice. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. Naomi, still kneeling beside her son, nodded once. Then Julian turned. His voice rose not loud, but commanding. "Step away from my family." Mathers opened his mouth, but Julian held up his badge case. "Mayor Julian Brooks. These officers just assaulted a nurse and endangered a child with a documented medical condition. Body comes off. No cause. No warrant. This ends now." Backup arrived moments later. Uniformed officers from the mayor's personal security detail. One began collecting statements. Another cuffed Mathers and Tate without a word. No protest. No justification. The damage had been done, but Elijah was breathing, and Naomi was finally seen. And just like that, the night turned, not with violence, but with accountability. Julian Brooks didn't shout. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence landed like thunder rolling across still water, low, steady, undeniable. As he stepped forward under the hazy gas station lights, rain misting off his shoulders, the officers instinctively straightened their hands, twitching toward holsters, not from threat, but exposure. The kind of panic that rises in men who know suddenly that the rules they've bent are about to snap back. Naomi Carter was crouched low by the open back door, her hands still trembling as she held Elijah close, pressing the inhaler to his lips with practiced urgency. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Julian's eyes met hers for just a second, enough for her to know he understood everything. Then he turned to face the men who had made her beg for air on behalf of her son. "This ends now," he repeated, voice calm but sharp enough to cut through steel. Officer Mather's smirk had vanished entirely. He looked to Tate, then back to Julian. "Mayor Brooks, with all due respect." "No," Julian said simply. "There's no respect here. No procedure. No protocol. You pulled a licensed healthcare worker from her vehicle without cause. You ignored her credentials. You endangered a child. And you did it all while the cameras were conveniently down." Tate's face flushed. What you thought," Julian interrupted, stepping closer, "is that no one would see. You thought that because it was late, because it was raining, and because she was a black woman at a gas station with a black child, you could operate unchecked." Naomi finally stood, her breathing still uneven, but her voice steady. "They knocked my phone to the ground when I said I'd call for help." Julian didn't look at her as she spoke, but his posture shifted tighter now. He nodded once and signaled to one of the plainclothes officers who had arrived with him. Within moments, her phone was recovered from under the car and handed to her carefully. "Do not delete anything," Julian told the officers. "This scene is now under formal review." Tate crossed his arms, posturing like defiance might redeem him. "You're using your title to interfere with an ongoing." Julian stepped within inches of him. "I'm using my authority to stop a violation of civil rights happening under my watch. Don't mistake your uniform for immunity." Then came the click of a mic. One of the officers behind Julian lifted a body cam and confirmed, "Recording now, sir." Already streaming to the city's accountability archive. That was new. That was Julian's initiative, one the union had fought, one that Savannah's city council had hesitated to fund. But now, in the grainy glow of that gas station lot, it was operational. Live streamed, secure, time-stamped with no way to redact, pause, or delete. "Get paramedics here," Julian ordered. "Now." Tate didn't move. Julian turned to one of the newer patrol officers nearby. "What's your name?" "Officer Chen, sir." "You're standing in the presence of a child having a documented asthma attack. Get an ambulance." "That's an order." Officer Chen moved faster than he had all night. Within minutes, the sirens returned, but this time they didn't signal fear. They signaled care. Naomi knelt once again beside Elijah, who was lying back now, the worst of the attack over, but still pale, still dazed. The EMTs arrived quickly, working with quiet precision. They slipped an oxygen mask over his face and whispered reassurances as they monitored his vitals. Naomi looked up at Julian once more. This time, she didn't nod. She simply stared, as if trying to memorize the shape of protection. When Elijah was stable enough to be moved, the EMTs rolled him onto a stretcher. Naomi walked beside them, holding her son's hand. his fingers curled around hers like roots clinging to the only soil they'd ever trusted. At the edge of the lot, just before stepping into the ambulance, she paused. "Julian," she said softly. He turned. "I didn't want this to be a spectacle," she said. "I just wanted to get home." "I know," he replied. "But they turned it into one the second they made you beg to prove you were human." She blinked hard once. "What happens now?" Julian looked back toward Mathers and Tate, both now seated on the hood of their cruiser wrists, bound their faces blank with disbelief. Then he looked toward the gas station attendant standing just inside the doorway, stunned, holding up a backup hard drive labeled Security Footage, 48HR Archive. Julian's answer was clear. "Now," he said, "we make sure it never happens again." He watched as the ambulance doors closed, as the red lights flashed across Naomi's face, as Elijah's eyes, barely open, finally fluttered shut. Julian didn't move until the vehicle pulled away, when he finally turned to the press, which had begun to gather, alerted by a reporter who lived 2 blocks away, and had heard the police call over a scanner. He didn't posture. He didn't perform. He just spoke. "This is not a story about a mayor saving his sister," he said. "This is a story about a woman who should never have needed saving in the first place. A nurse who saved lives every day. A boy smart enough to send one text. And a system that failed both of them." He didn't mention his office. He didn't talk about policy. He just said this: "If your badge gives you power over someone else's breath, and you use it to take rather than protect, you don't deserve that badge. And if this city allows that, we don't deserve her." Then he walked away, and the cameras followed. But Naomi didn't care about the coverage. She didn't care about the policies or the podiums. In the back of the ambulance, with Elijah's hand still warm in hers, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, not a prayer, but a promise. Not again. Not to us. Not to anyone else. That night, Savannah didn't just witness power. It witnessed what it looked like when power showed up with a backbone and a blood bond and said, "This is where it stops." The city of Savannah wasn't quiet anymore. By the next morning, the footage had already traveled beyond Georgia's borders. News outlets from New York to Los Angeles carried it in clipped segments. Naomi Carter's steady hands holding her son, the sharp audio of officers mocking her, the voice of a child wheezing, struggling to speak, while recording the truth. But more than that, it was Julian Brooks standing in the rain stating clearly, "She paid for your mistake with her dignity, and we're done letting that slide." In the mayor's press room, the air was thick with anticipation. It wasn't the grand rotunda, but a smaller space one that had seen zoning meetings and storm recovery plans, but never something like this. Rows of folding chairs filled fast. Every local reporter took their seat, early camera crews lining the back wall like statues with lenses. No one knew exactly what Julian would say, but everyone knew this wasn't going to be business as usual. Julian entered with no entourage. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, a stark contrast to his usual clean-pressed formality. He didn't clear his throat or shuffle papers. He looked directly into the crowd and began. "Last night in our city, a nurse finishing her shift was assaulted by the people sworn to protect her. Her 10-year-old son, Elijah, nearly died from an asthma attack because officers treated her humanity as optional. And they did so, believing the system would look the other way." He paused, letting that truth settle like dust on old marble. They were wrong. Cameras clicked, fingers froze mid-typing. The mayor wasn't reading from a script. He wasn't offering condolences. He was indicting silence. I stand before you not as a politician seeking votes, he continued, but as a brother who saw his family treated like a threat for daring to exist outside a hospital parking lot. What happened to Naomi and Elijah wasn't a mistake. It was a reflection of a culture in policing that sees compliance as worth that, treats black motherhood as suspect, and black childhood as expendable. From the back of the room, a reporter raised her hand. Mayor Brooks, what specific actions will the city take? Julian nodded. We are not investigating this quietly. This will not be brushed into a corner labeled unfortunate misunderstanding. Subponthi, effective immediately, officers Tate and Mathers are suspended without pay pending criminal charges filed by the district attorney. Their body cam footage, though conveniently deactivated, will be cross-examined with bystander recordings, EMT statements, and internal dispatch logs. Any officer who contributed to this culture through silence or participation will be identified. He stepped closer to the mic. This isn't about punishment. It's about prevention. The room stayed silent for a beat too long, as though no one wanted to be the first to speak after that. Finally, another journalist asked, "And what about the department itself?" Julian didn't hesitate. We will restructure, starting with a civilian oversight committee led by healthcare professionals, educators, and community organizers, not career officers. We will revise traffic stop protocols, enforce zero tolerance for equipment deactivation, and begin third-party reviews of racial bias in every precinct. But the union, someone called out. Julian's jaw tightened. The union doesn't decide how justice moves forward. The people do. That afternoon, Naomi sat in her apartment, wrapped in a wool blanket, with Elijah asleep beside her on the couch. The soft hum of news coverage played in the background, but she wasn't listening to the pundits or the press. Her eyes stayed on the boy beside her, his chest rising more evenly now, his lips no longer blue, a trace of peace settling back over him. She hadn't cried. Not yet. Maybe she was too tired. Or maybe the part of her that had always prepared for this moment, the part that knew someday someone would look at her son and see danger before they saw innocence, wasn't surprised enough to weep. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. Council just passed emergency legislation. It's called the Elijah Protocol. Every child present during a traffic stop now mandates automatic medical assessment. Named it for the kid who saved his mother with a single call. She stared at the screen for a long time, then replied, "Tell them I'm not done speaking." 2 days later, Naomi Carter stood inside City Hall, not behind her brother, but beside him. Her shoulder still ached where Doyle had twisted it, and the bruises hadn't faded, but her voice was strong, calm, intentional. "There is nothing civil about being silenced," she said into the microphone, "and nothing lawful about watching a child choke while his mother is questioned like a thief. What happened to me is not rare. The difference is we had a witness. We had a child brave enough to hit record. We had a brother who answered the call. But so many women like me don't." She turned toward the press. "So let me be clear. I will not let my trauma be absorbed as spectacle. This isn't the end of a viral video. It's the beginning of accountability." The mayor didn't speak that day. He didn't have to. The system had found its voice, and it sounded like a nurse who refused to disappear. That evening, hundreds gathered outside the courthouse. Not for protest, but for presence. They held candles, stethoscopes, story signs. Some wore their hospital badges. Others, school IDs. No one chanted. They didn't need to. On the courthouse steps, a message had been projected across the stone we saw. We believed. We acted. Inside, Officers Mathers and Tate waited for their arraignment. They wore plain clothes, now stripped of their uniforms, their shields surrendered. Their lawyers whispered strategy, but their eyes stayed fixed on the wall, on the footage, on the sound of their own voices played back in loop, unfiltered, unedited, unforgivable. Elijah Carter would never forget the night he recorded them, but neither would the system that now bore his name. Elijah Carter didn't say much in the days that followed. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a child who had already spoken volumes with the presence of mind to act when adults faltered, with the instinct to protect when no one else would. And that instinct, born not from heroism, but necessity, became the cornerstone of everything that followed. In the classrooms of Savannah Elementary, Elijah's name was suddenly everywhere. Teachers whispered it with a mix of awe and sorrow. Some wanted to protect him, to shield him from the weight of the moment. Others asked him to speak, to stand up and explain how he'd found the courage. But Elijah didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted things to feel normal again. He wanted to do spelling homework without wondering if a police cruiser would pull up behind his mother's car. He wanted to go to the park without clutching his inhaler like armor. Naomi, ever protective, tried to give him that normalcy. She enrolled him in art therapy, kept their apartment a no-news zone, and encouraged him to draw what he couldn't say. One afternoon, she found a crumpled sketch by the trash. Two figures standing beneath a red gas station sign. One taller, one smaller, both holding hands. One glowing. She pressed it against her chest and wept for the first time since that night. But Elijah had already given the world more than a drawing. He had offered a blueprint. The truth is, children like Elijah see more than we allow ourselves to admit. They notice the way voices change when uniforms approach. They feel the tension in a mother's hand when she grips the steering wheel tighter. They hear the coded language of suspicion before they even know what the words mean. Elijah didn't act out of impulse. He acted because he'd been watching, listening, absorbing a world that demanded he be cautious long before it allowed him to be free. And in doing so, he taught Savannah something its leaders hadn't yet learned: that safety does not begin with policy. It begins with perspective. He reminded a city that resilience isn't built in courtrooms or conference halls, but in the breathless seconds where fear meets action, in the quiet decisions that define who we become when no one else is looking. When Elijah pressed record, he wasn't trying to spark a movement. He was trying to save his mom. But the movement came anyway. It came in the form of legislation bearing his name. The Elijah Protocol wasn't just a law, it was a promise. That no child would be ignored, that no mother would have to scream into silence again, that officers would no longer patrol with the assumption that their word was final and unchecked. It forced institutions to consider what a 10-year-old already knew: that power without accountability isn't order, it's chaos with a badge. But what Elijah gave was more than legislation. He gave us pause. He gave us perspective. He gave us proof that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes it forever. 1 month after the incident, the city of Savannah hosted a town hall in a local auditorium. Not a press event, not a performance, just space for neighbors, for nurses, for kids with questions, and adults with overdue answers. Naomi sat in the second row, Elijah beside her legs, swinging under the seat. When asked if he wanted to speak, Elijah shook his head. But as the event ended, he stood on his own, walked up to the microphone, looked out at rows of people older than him, stronger than him, more powerful than him, and simply said, "Just because I'm small doesn't mean I can't see what's wrong. And it doesn't mean I can't do something about it." The room held its breath, then applauded not out of ceremony, but understanding. Back home that night, Naomi tucked Elijah into bed and whispered, "I'm proud of you. Not because of what you did, but because of who you are." He blinked up at her, sleepy, but certain. "You would have done the same for me." She kissed his forehead. "I'll always do the same for you." That's what Elijah Carter taught us, that protection is not a privilege. It's a right. That courage is not reserved for the old or powerful. It lives in everyone waiting for a moment to rise. And when it does, the world doesn't just change. It remembers how to be better. In the stillness that followed the storm, Savannah remembered the names that mattered: Naomi Carter, a single mother who had endured injustice with dignity, and Elijah Carter, her 10-year-old son, who had the courage to act when no one else would. What began as a quiet stop at a gas station became a defining moment for an entire city. It exposed the cracks in a system meant to protect, and through the actions of one small boy, demanded that those cracks be sealed with truth, accountability, and change. Naomi didn't set out to become a symbol. She was just trying to get home, just trying to keep her son safe after a long shift. But when the uniformed men approached her with suspicion instead of respect, with power instead of care, she stood her ground, not with rage, but with composure. And when they crossed every line of decency and law, it was her son Elijah who quietly turned the tide. A single message, a recorded moment, a call answered not only by his uncle Mayor Julian Brooks, but by a community no longer willing to stay silent. What followed was not just punishment for the officers, but a reckoning for a city long accustomed to looking the other way. Savannah passed new legislation reform protocol and created the Elijah Protocol to ensure body cams remained on and misconduct never went unseen again. But more than policy, the Carters gave Savannah something harder to write into law perspective. Their story is a reminder that change doesn't always come in grand speeches or protests. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a trembling hand, holding a phone, through a mother refusing to be broken, through the unwavering love between family. It reminds us that injustice often wears a smile before it bares its teeth, and that courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's small, quiet, and desperate to breathe. The lesson from this story is simple but profound. Our silence has consequences, but so does our voice. And we all, no matter our size, age, or status, have a role in protecting the truth. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a public servant, or just someone passing through a quiet night, what you choose to see, what you choose to say, and when you choose to act can make all the difference. In a world where injustice hides behind protocol, where fear is too often justified, let this story be your reminder. Watch closely. Speak clearly. Stand firmly. And when you see someone being treated as less than human, do not look away. If Elijah's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own power to choose justice, to fight for dignity, to believe in something better, then please support the work we're doing here. Subscribe to our channel turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one voice can still make a difference. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter, stories that shine light, spark change, and remind us all what it means to be human.